Before we continue, understand this podcast is for adults only and refers to relationships and activities between adults which are voluntary and consensual. If you or anyone you know is being abused, coerced, or violently aggressed against, please reach out for help to the appropriate authorities. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Gorean Voice podcast. I'm your host, Pan. I'll tell you a little about me towards the end. The name of this podcast is a tribute to a website that existed 20 years ago. It was called the Gorean Voice, and it was updated monthly as a little online magazine. It had many of the features of a small newspaper. Discussions about the books, crosswords, even recipes, I think, and original CGI artwork. I don't know when it came down, but I seem to recall looking at it as recently as 2006 or so. So what is Gorean exactly? Gorean, as an adjective, means related to the planet Gore, which is a fictional planet in the science fiction works of author John Norman. It's also a demonym, referring to both the human inhabitants of that planet and is the name of the most widely spoken language there. In addition to having a dedicated fan base, the Gore series has inspired thousands of people to live a lifestyle inspired by that of the fictional characters described in the books. This has been going on since the books were first published in the late 60s, but seems to have really taken off with the advent of widely available internet access. Such connectivity has enabled many niche subcultures to have their fans or acolytes find each other regardless of location. But there's something different about the Gore books. Why has it generated such interest in practicing a lifestyle? There aren't any practicing Jedi that I know of, nor are there practicing Shire Hobbits, Ghostbusters, X-Men, Pokemon trainers. There's no worshippers of Rao, the Kryptonian sun god. With few exceptions, the fans of those fictions and fantasies, though they may enjoy indulging the fantasy on occasion, they don't organize their lives according to, the Force or the United Federations of Planet Prime Directive. On a side note, I have read that there is such a thing as an organized league for Quidditch, a fictional sport from the Harry Potter series where people pretend to fly about on broomsticks. I've never read the books, so I'm not really qualified to judge how closely they keep to the source material. So there is something different about Goreans. Now, John Norman is hardly the only sci-fi author who had something to say about how things should be. There's plenty of left-wing utopianism floating about the sci-fi world. There's even a little right-wing stuff, like Heinlein, who had plenty to say about how things should be between the sexes. Although many people have added the word grok to their vocabulary, there's nobody that I've ever heard of who practices the Martian cult of Michael Valentine from the novel Stranger in a Strange Land. I've heard that Charles Manson had this in his possession when he was arrested, by the way. The difference with Goreans, however, is that not only does one practice a Gorean lifestyle, minus religious aspects, but one does so as a normative practice. A Gorean lifestyler engages in the lifestyle not as a matter of taste, though there is plenty of taste to be had. A Gorean walks this path because he or she believes that this path is the better path. Better for himself or herself, possibly better for others. One makes a Norman normative argument here just by playing the game. So what was John Norman's argument? What is the central conceit of his Gore series of books? It was reactionary against feminism for sure. The series takes place on a harsh world with many muscled he-men and buxom vixens among its human population. Technology is artificially limited by the mostly unseen priest-kings. This is not only the perfect antidote to the feminist quip that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, as on such a world, Men have much more to do than open tight jars and reach higher shelves. It also serves to keep the slender fingers of the planet's women occupied by gracefully engaging them in domestic labor and keeping them from typing up such nihilistic screeds or other works of toxic feminism. The central theme of the works is that not only is the primitive existence fulfilling, meaningful, and satisfying to the men, who get to play Conan but for keeps, even if many of them lose, but that it's also fulfilling, meaningful, and satisfying for the women. He also asserts that this condition of male dominance and female submission / slavery would be an improvement over the contemporary culture, particularly in the Western world. The thing is, on the first point, the man wasn't wrong. Many, if not most women, for a variety of reasons, which we will explore in later episodes, do indeed thrive in a submissive role, and they thrive the most when they are reduced to utter chattel, at least aesthetically. On his second point, would a Gorean ethic or philosophy be an improvement over what we have now in the West? John Norman's assertion matches at least my experience with women. They are made happy by ignoring their verbally stated wishes and moving forward with interactions that complement their revealed preferences. This is obviously a fine line to walk. Too slow and you're out. Too fast and you're literally a criminal. This idea goes by other names. The game guys call it a shit test, and religious traditions frequently also have some element by which the man must override his wife's stated preferences in order to keep her on the righteous path. So what is this? Is this an endorsement of what people call rape culture? Unfortunately, this is not a question you can ask your woman, in the same way that a woman cannot tell her man what she wants. You know why she can't? Most women can't for the simple reason that what she wants is for her man to already know what she wants and to bloody well give it to her. Back to Gorean in general, though. People have been living various degrees of Gorean lifestyle now for going on 6 decades, with a major uptick in the last 3. What exactly does it mean to live Gorean? There are a few facets. For one thing, living Gorean is an aesthetic enterprise. Don't let the word make you think it's all about appearances. Aesthetics is a lot more than picking paint colors and matching bathroom tiles. It is feeling things, and Gore can truly feel beautiful and fulfilling. Beauty is a type of truth that can transcend forensic truth, but I'll get into that one in a later episode. For another thing, living Gorean is a relational enterprise. How the slaves defer to the free, how men relate to each other as comrades, brothers, or even enemies. How women relate to each other as well. It's all part of the mix. Like identity, and even sanity, living Gorean is best practiced in some manner of relationship and fellowship. Otherwise, it's just a private, fantastic indulgence. A little sidebar on identity. One thing that people can sometimes lose hold of, whether in a Gorean context or some wider context, is that identity itself is a relational enterprise. There are contemporary arguments that state that one's identity can be defined completely by one's own subjective experience of it, and that one may unilaterally assert one's identity. Indeed, my ears have been worn out by the phrase, "I identify as whatever." To identify as something is really only a small part of one's identity, and much of identity is negotiated with other people. I may identify as something totally outrageous, but the only peaceful means I have at my disposal to have others recognize my identity is to convince them by word or deed. Unfortunately, in much of the West, it seems there are people who want to use the awesome power of law to coerce people into recognizing these asserted identities. Identity itself will be a topic for another episode. Back to Gorean in general. In my experience as a man, living the Gorean lifestyle means unapologetically embracing some synthesis of the various codes of masculine behavior that have gone almost completely out of fashion over the last 2 millennia. It means being unapologetically masculine, or feminine as the case may be, in the relationships that are the most salient in one's life, intimate relationships for most, and for a growing number, fellowship with other Goreans. There are submissive men and free women, etc. on Gore, and they will also be a topic for another episode. This podcast will explore, over the next several episodes, how people try to live Gorean, and for those interested but not yet familiar, a breakdown of Gorean-related topics. Please note that while I acknowledge there is a beauty and a certain value to be found by discussing at length the fictional world of Gore, the primary focus of this podcast going forward is about living Gorean here on Earth. I don't treat the Gore books as scripture, and I don't accuse John Norman of being a prophet. I will liberally reference the books, but knowing them chapter and verse isn't remotely necessary. While I highly recommend that anyone interested in pursuing a Gorean lifestyle read the books, doing so is by no means a prerequisite for listening. This podcast can be enjoyed standalone. Mistakes are, of course, my own. After that suspiciously unterse introduction, let's get into today's topic. Becoming a man. John Norman's Gorean cultures, that's cultures with an S, seem to be heavily inspired by various Earth cultures, not the least of which are Greco-Roman, Viking, Inuit, Plains natives, samurai, and various flavors of tribal nomadism. Each of these cultures, in addition to taking a harsh, paleo-conservative approach to gender roles, has, or had, something that modernity is lacking. There is a clear understanding of when and how a boy becomes a man. How does a boy become a man? Throughout most of human history, boys became men very differently than how girls became women. Girls, you see, have a pretty close encounter with biology in their early teens. Their chemistry changes, their minds change, their bodies change, everything changes. These changes aren't exactly convenient, and perhaps the most disturbing part for them is that they are accompanied by a new type of unwanted attention from boys and men. This is not to say that girls don't have anything to learn that nature can't teach them in order to excel at being a woman. There are plenty of oblique techniques and indirect strategies for living well that wizened matriarchs teach to mothers, who in turn teach it to their daughters. Boys, though, face no such tribulation these days. Every change is an upgrade. They go from weak to stronger and stronger still. They get bigger and more capable. Sure, they may be a touch clumsy for a year or two during the transition, and it takes some time to master the use of their new, deeper voice. But boys don't go through a specific turning point. In fact, our cultures seem to allow boys to remain boys well into what there should be their adulthood. There are boys well into their 5th decade walking around my city. There isn't a turning point anymore, not in the West. Previously, most cultures had boys go through some initiation or other in order to become men. In some cultures, failure was fatal. In others, failure meant exile, or sometimes merely relegation to never living with the rights and privileges of being a full-patch man of the tribe. One wouldn't get to take a wife, or hold the talking stick, or sit at the longhouse table, or carve one's bow from the wood of the sacred tree. In other cultures, failing the initiation just meant that the boy had to wait a few years and try again. Whatever the ritual was, it made things very clear. Before the ritual, you were a child, a boy. You were your parents' responsibility. Afterwards, you were a man, and you had to deal with the consequences of your actions yourself moving forward. From what I've read, initiation rites across all pre-modern cultures had 3 major elements. Those were 1. The endurance of suffering, usually physical, 2. A spiritual experience, and 3. Mentorship. Sometimes the physical suffering also demanded a specific active pursuit, like a difficult first hunt, an attack on an enemy, or even just a vicious beating at the hands of the older males of the tribe. The spiritual side of the initiation took many forms, from an austere ascetic practice such as fasting, meditation, or silent prayer, to a more intense brief experience like a psychedelic trip with the aid of various plant medicines. Frequently, the exhaustion and minor trauma of enduring the physical side of the ordeal was a spiritually transcendental experience all on its own, and the initiation need not have an explicit spiritual dimension. If you survived the bloody thing, surely you were on good terms with the spirit world. The mentorship was ongoing, though there was frequently secrecy surrounding the ritual itself. It's important to note that in many cultures there were alternative pathways to legitimate manhood, the standard formula of boy, then initiation, then man, father, patriarch, herdsman, warrior, farmer, hunter, artisan, was not the only path. These alternative pathways usually had a deeper spiritual element, and were frequently reserved for boys who had what were perceived as special gifts or special attributes. Sometimes these different tracks were reserved for boys who had suffered crippling injuries and would otherwise be unable to complete an initiation in the usual way. Sometimes it was for boys who didn't seem interested in girls. And other times it was for boys who had what today we would call autism. The boys who walked these alternative pathways went on to become priests, shamans, medicine men, monks, etc. These positions were prestigious in their own right, though they sometimes lie outside of the traditional power structure of the tribe, and may or may not exclude such a man from taking a wife and becoming a patriarch himself. The ritual itself need not necessarily have been dangerous or even physical. For instance, I have a great deal of admiration for the bar mitzvah, after which a young Jewish man is responsible for his own affairs, can contract, handle his own business, lead group prayers, and be counted as a grown man for a prayer quorum. While this lacked the endurance of intense physical pain, the spiritual dimension and continued mentorship from older men in the community ensured that the recently initiated man would be well integrated into the wider Jewish community as a productive member of society, and eventually be positioned to expand his education or business prospects, and someday start a family of his own. I believe that for most men in the West, these rituals are either entirely absent, as in the case of most men, or have been diluted down nearly to meaninglessness. In many cases, particularly in criminal subculture contexts, the rituals emphasize the physical ordeal and perhaps the violence, but the other aspects are touched upon only in the most dysfunctional way. In the wide world that we modern men operate in, a tribal initiation has its downsides. Would it really be wise for a young man to undergo these rituals and get tattooed or pierced or whichever other body mods are in order to become a man, etc., given that he'll still need to function in wider society? Perhaps not. I have a great admiration for the tattoos of Pacific Islanders, but I'm not exactly keen to cover myself in them, and I must admit I'd probably discriminate against an individual so adorned in a professional context. As we have acquired our impressive array of shiny, beeping trinkets, modern conveniences, and climate-controlled environments, we have certainly lost some things along the way. The losses aren't as immediately palpable as the gains, and that's the problem. Indoor plumbing and electricity, well, they start paying dividends from day one. The loss of a strong, masculine culture doesn't start to cost anything until a few generations hence. We've been living in some easy times, and it's not all upside. For those of us who have managed to wrest some manhood out of this modern nihilistic culture, it's crucial that we continue to cultivate it in a manner that is productive, not only by the lights of wider society, but most definitely by the lights of what we know to be good and true. John Norman's implied, and at times stated thesis, was that the relationships between the sexes has become wholly dysfunctional in a way that is unsustainable, but more importantly, creates utter misery for both parties. I believe he was right. Since an exotic and dangerous adventure on the far side of the sun is not on offer, what is a lad to do? Young men who are listening, I sure hope that if you're not crippled, you're moving while you're listening to this. If you're on the laptop, at least clean your desk, make your bed, or clean your room while you're listening. Better yet, be outside and moving towards something you want. Don't pretend you don't have the technology. How are you going to be initiated? Will you earn the Eagle Scout badge? Will you finally fill out your ROTC paperwork? Will you join a jiu-jitsu gym and step into the arena? Whatever it is, I hope it scares you. If it doesn't, you're aiming way too low. At the moment, what can you do? That's going to depend on the context of where you are. But there are hard things to do. Take cold showers. Sign up for one of those Spartan races or Tough Mudder runs. It's not that pushing yourself through that makes you a man. Pushing yourself through buds doesn't even make you a man. But you'll be forging the base of what you'll need to make yourself into a man. Are you scared of talking to people? Sign up for a commission-only sales gig. Are you skinny and weak? Well, pick up heavy things and put them down. Are you fat? Eat less and move more. Embrace the hunger pains that come when you start fasting. Do something that makes you dig deep. 2024 is making you soft, man. Get harder. And for the older gentlemen listening, perhaps you've already gone through some initiation. Maybe you had the misfortune of not feeling the need to, and you've had to cobble together a masculine identity piece by piece instead of all at once. That's fine. Don't put your body through something you won't survive. But please help show young men the way. Perhaps you elders who never went to Paris Island, or rode with the Hells Angels, or who never went on a missionary trip with your church, perhaps it's you who are best positioned to know just how important such an experience is. If that's the case, the mentorship side is still very much open to you, and your tales of reticence and caution, rather than of danger and daring do, might be able to right the ship of masculine culture. At the moment, there are a lot of lost boys. Boy, are they lost. And if they're ever to master women, they'll need to first master themselves. They won't be able to do so unless they put themselves through some ordeal in this world where your phone can make food show up at your doorstep in 15 minutes. So, older fellas, get ready to put some time in teaching and mentoring. The thing is, young men don't want to hear your words of wisdom. They don't want to be taught. They don't even want to be mentored. But they do want to learn your skills, and they do want to learn how to play with your cool toys. You might be able to sneak in a few of those wise words, though, while your protege is having too much fun learning how to use a timing light or how to refletch arrow shafts. What has this got to do, though, with living Gorean? There is no doubt in my mind that the various cultures that John Norman populated the Gore series with all had manhood initiations for their boys, even if he wasn't always explicit about it. I think Gore is in need of something of a renaissance at the moment, and this can only come from the men. Why is this the case? Look, a woman can kneel gracefully at your feet. She can even initiate you into manhood in the most carnal way. She can even inspire you to become a man, or a better man, but you still need to do the work. She can't make a man out of you. So Gore needs a renaissance, and my endeavor is to make this podcast a part of that renaissance. John Norman may have had high ambitions for his work. I've read and listened to critical interpretations of his opinions on his own books. Did he hope to land on the same marble plinth as Muhammad, Joseph Smith, and L. Ron Hubbard? Maybe, but I doubt it. I think he saw a problem and presented an elegant, if incomplete, solution. That's fine. For life, I much prefer incomplete solutions. They leave more room for playing jazzy notes. So please join me again next week when we have a look at the books themselves. As promised, a little about me. I'm Pan. I'm a builder, a musician, part-time warrior, part-time fighter, but always a full-time lover. I'm a happy patriarch, I'm an angry citizen, I'm a beekeeper, 3D printer, a woodworker, a marksman, ham radio guy, and a crafter of fine slave collars for women's necks. I was born and raised in some country where many people speak English. Take care and be well.